Really, the last thing I want to cover in this chapter is the layer mask function. And the way layer masks work basically is this idea of taking a layer, and I'll just go ahead and turn off my liquid ink layer and focus on my watercolor layer, and adding a mask. So this button right here creates a new layer mask. And what that does is it creates a second image next to the image that we have currently in our watercolor layer. And if I paint in the second image, and you can tell I'm painting in it because it's got the black outline around it. If I click on this, you'll see the black outline is around the watercolor, but here the black outline is around the mask. So if I come over here and I grab something that'll be fairly strong so that you can see it very quickly, I'll choose the gouache flatter. And I want to make sure that I'm painting with black, pure black, as a matter of fact, all the way down to 0, 0, 0. Red, green, blue, 0, 0, 0. And what this will do is this will give us 100% of a cutout. So if I paint, you can see it's effectively erasing. But the interesting thing is it's not really erased at all, because if I come over here and I context click on this and I say disable layer mask, you can see that the painting is still there. The only thing is that since the mask is turned off, and you can tell it's turned off by the red X, if I turn enable layer mask back on, you can see that very clearly. The interesting thing here is that one of the best sets of tools for creating these types of layer masks is our liquid ink category that we've already talked about for our high contrast black and white. The problem with the liquid ink category, and I'll go back to our gouache, is that the liquid ink does not work in the layer mask. We can paint with most of our regular painting tools, but we cannot use watercolor and we can't use liquid ink in our layer mask. So in order to get this liquid ink data that we have down here into our watercolor mask, what we need to do is we need to load this as a selection. And the easiest way of doing that is to context click on the layer itself and say select layer content. And then once we've done that, and remember this has been converted to a regular layer, come up here to our watercolor layer, click here in our layer mask to make that active, and then go up to select invert selection. And then come over here to the paint bucket tool and fill that background with black. Now immediately you'll see the layer mask thumbnail turns black except for the white area in the center. And if we go ahead and turn off the liquid ink layer and turn on the watercolor layer and hit Control D to deselect that selection, you can see now that everything that was around that was the liquid ink white areas have now been turned to transparency, and everything that was within that was black has now been made opaque so that we can see these nice hard edges. Now we still also have that original stroke that I made with the flatter, so if I wanted to, I could continue painting with the flatter to cut even more out of there. Now this is a fairly abstract exercise, and I don't know if that really made an awful lot of impression on you, but let me go ahead and show you a more complex example. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. And I'm going to go ahead and open something in the work files. It's called Frisket Example. Now, this has been a liquid ink document that I've created. It's on this layer right here. And this liquid ink document has a lot of textural stuff going on. If I zoom in a couple times, there we go. One more time, you can see we've got a lot of texture going on here, a lot of interesting texture. If you've ever used liquid Frisket with real watercolors, you'll know that it creates a really hard, crisp edge. And that's exactly what we get with these nice liquid ink brushes with the textural quality that they can give you. So what we need to do here is we need to convert this liquid ink layer to a regular layer. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on that, context click on it, and then say convert to default layer. And then what we want to do is we want to context click on it and say select layer content. Then we want to come down to this watercolor layer. Now this watercolor layer, if I turn it on, you can see I've just kind of splish splashed everything around in there, and I'll come back and show you more about that later in a second. But I want to go ahead and add a layer mask to this watercolor layer. I want to make sure that I'm working in this, and I want to go to select, invert selection, and then I want to come over to our paint bucket, and again I want to make sure I'm filling with pure black, and I'm just going to fill out here. Alright, well let's try this. Select, invert selection. There we go. And let's go ahead now and Control D to deselect that, and we'll zoom out a little bit so that you can see this total effect. So here we go. Here we've got the beginnings of a tree We could have a whole background going on back there and foreground or whatever. But the bottom line here is that this liquid frisket effect that you would commonly use in watercolors is very easy to achieve using these layer masks. Now that I've got my mask, I can delete my liquid ink layer. And let's just go ahead and disable that mask for a second so that you can see how useful this is. So this is my watercolor layer, and as you can see, this is not useful at all. I mean, it's really just kind of garbage. But once you add that frisket effect in there, you've got exactly what you're looking for. Now, let's say that you're done, and you know that you're done, and you don't want to have that layer mask affecting things anymore. You want to make it a permanently cut away. You want it to permanently cut away all that stuff that was outside of the layer mask. What you want to do is you want to go in here and you want to say apply layer mask. And we're going to commit to image layer, say commit. And now that is a regular default layer. And as you can see, there is no layer mask, and the opacity for this layer is limited to what was going on with our layer mask. So this is a really great way of achieving a frisket-like look when you're painting with your digital watercolors using your liquid ink tools.